Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we have a healing topic to talk about that is a little bit more abstract, so it's not going to be, it doesn't really fit into any particular healing guide video that I've kind of done before. It's kind of more general philosophies about healing in WoW Classic, so I figured I'd put it in one of these kind of, off-the-cuff style videos. And it's basically going to be talking about where should your best player or players be assigned in Raid, because we've talked about a lot of things on this channel, but I've realized that we haven't really covered healing assignments. I might make a separate video on what I think of healing assignments and everything of that sort, but I think it's pretty common that people use some sort of healing assignment at least. Usually in every guild that I've been in, they have some sort of spreadsheet drawn up, and they have, these people are on the Raid, these people are on the tank. And then even in pugs, for the most part, a lot of people do go through the efforts of kind of making like a Google sheet or something to that equivalent, and they just swap names in and out. So even if people aren't consistent every week, they'll plug somebody in here, take somebody out there, and they usually go by pretty standard conventions, I would say. So for example, shaman typically raid heal, right, and then paladins typically tank heal. Priests typically tank heal on Horde, paladins, priests on Alliance typically raid heal, and then you'll have druids that kind of, I feel like druids, it's like a mixed bag. You never know where they're going to send the druid, kind of just like based on their perception of how druid healing works, I guess. And I think that for the most part, these are pretty logical attempts to kind of set up some sort of loose structure, to make sure that kind of everybody gets healed. And what I'm really want to talk about in this video is that I think your best player or best players shouldn't be healing the tank. And that's a bit counterintuitive. It seems like the complete opposite of what you would generally think. And to be honest, most people, I think, almost definitely see it the other way. So there's a couple groups I've been running with for quite a while now, and basically, when I started in those groups, I get put on the raid because I didn't know anybody, anything like that. It was just like, this is X priest number 4 or 3 or whatever that we're going to add to the roster. We need another healer tonight. Same thing with the paladin. This is like the 4th or 5th paladin. We're just going to add this guy to the raid. And then if I keep running with them, like my raid on Monday and my raid on Wednesday, I noticed that over time I get basically put on the tank, and it pretty much happens in like every run that I go in. And my suspicion is that like they like the consistency, they like the healing output, and they think, well, this guy's pretty good, so we're just gonna stick him on the tank all the time, and that's gonna be by far like the best use of this person. We want him watching the tank, right? And it makes sense, right? Because the tank is kind of the most important person in the raid. If the tank goes down, the raid, it's not guaranteed gonna wipe, but in a lot of cases it can cause quite a few problems. So it's just better if the tank doesn't go down. Also, the tank going down once kind of is pretty conducive to him going down again and again, because now he doesn't have buffs. Now other people can rip threat off him way easier. So it's just gonna cause a lot of problems, generally speaking, if the tank dies in the raid. So it makes a lot of sense that you would put, people who you think are your best players on the tank. Now, the thing is that from my perspective, the best players in your raid tend to be the most aware players, especially when we're talking about healers, right? So it doesn't really have a ton to do with their gear. It doesn't necessarily have to do with how fast they are in terms of pressing their buttons. It doesn't necessarily even have much to do with like how knowledgeable they are in terms of like their class and all the different spell ranks, and are they like optimizing for mana here, right? Like, are we using the best rank heal possible to heal in this specific situation? It's really more to do with their like general awareness. And again, if you told somebody this that was making the raid roster, again, they would probably be like, well, that's even more reason to put them on the tank, right? Because I want the most aware person to be on the tank 24/7. And again, that makes sense, right? Hard to fault them. But I think the reality of the situation is that because those are typically your most aware players, what you really want to be doing with them is kind of putting them on the raid or letting them sort of free heal. And the idea is they're going to be watching the tank 80 to 90% of the time anyway, because the tank is the most consistent source of healing, right? Like pretty much period. And any player that kind of knows anything about the game also knows that the tank is by far the most important role to keep alive in the raid period. So naturally, somebody who's just aware of what's going on, aware of what it takes to have a clean raid, is going to be watching the tank like a hawk, right? But at the same time, if they are fast and if they are aware in other areas, they can also kind of spread themselves out to be that clutch hero, right? They can get bops on people who otherwise would have died. They can get shields on people who would have died. They can start flash healing that warrior that took threat as soon as they see it on the nameplate because they have their nameplates configured properly, and they're able to start a flash heal and actually have it finished by the time that guy is low, right? So the most aware players that you have are going to be more capable of doing all those things than the people who are kind of just like chilling, sitting there, watching Netflix and playing the game, right? And that's not like hating on the people who like to do that, right? I get it. Classic WoW is kind of like a chill game, and it does kind of provide that opportunity for people, and maybe that's fun for them. They want to be watching a show or something like that while they're playing, and that's totally fine. But obviously a player that's sort of distracted like that, or just a player that just doesn't have as much experience in general, they're going to be less able to kind of flex off of whatever role they're given and help out in other roles. And even if they're given the role of like raid heal, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be as effective at getting key dispels off, at getting key bops off, getting key shields off, things like that. So how I would do it and how I recommend doing it in terms of how people use me when I'm in a raid is I'm like, just put me on the raid essentially, and don't worry, because I'm going to be like an extra guardian angel looking over the tank pretty much at all times, because like I said, most of the healing comes to the tank. The tank probably takes, if you look at damage share for the entire raid, like the tanks are obviously taking the most damage. And this even goes for somebody who's like a very parse hungry player, right? If you have somebody who's very parse orientated, they're still actually going to want to be looking at the tank for a majority of the raid, right? Because tanks take the most damage in the raid. And in that particular case, I think it's even more important that for those type of players, you keep them on the raid, because the situations that kind of conspire to, that might help them boost their parses aren't necessarily always advantageous to keeping the tank alive. So for example, on Broodlord, that fight is an interesting fight because kind of everything is going smooth, right? Nobody's taking any damage basically. Then all of a sudden the blast wave comes out. And if you're like a priest or something like that who's very, very like parse obsessed, and you're trying to like max your Broodlord parse or something, and the blast wave goes out, you immediately swap off and you start healing the blast wave targets. And it can be very easy for you to just kind of forget about the tank, because now everybody in the raid looks damaged, right? And you're just kind of going from one target to one target, bringing them back to full health, etc. So in that particular circumstance, you might easily neglect your assignment, right? And the tank could end up dying there. So I think especially in those parse brain cases, you definitely want to put those people on the raid. But even if they're not like parse brain, if they're just like a good player, in general, you want to put them on the raid and let them flex on the tank, because if somebody is truly a good player, they generally know when the tank needs more healing and when he doesn't need as much healing, right? I mentioned this in some of my walkthrough videos, but those are kind of long, so I don't blame you if you don't watch this. But what I'll do sometimes when I get into a new raid, especially like a pug that I haven't played before, is I'll kind of gauge how much healing is on the tank, right? And you can kind of tell, especially if you have some sort of Healcom, which I definitely recommend setting up. Most of the unit frame add-ons have it, like Cell has it, for example, built in. I believe if you don't have, if you're just using the default raid frames, you can download, I think it's actually called Healcom in, what do you call it, through CurseForge. But I'm not really sure, and I've had issues with some versions of Healcom in terms of them not working super well, so that's why I ended up just going with the cell version. But regardless, just try and find some version of Healcom, and you'll be able to see, for the most part, I mean, not entirely, because not everybody uses Healcom, but you'll kind of get a good idea of how many heals are coming in the tank. And even if you don't have Healcom, or even if a lot of people in your raid aren't using Healcom, you will just visually be able to see, like, you know, how intense the healing is on the tank, and kind of judging what this is right off the rip. It can be especially helpful in terms of later on in the instance, right? So on the earlier fights, or maybe the earlier trash where the stakes aren't as high, you can kind of see how much attention is given to the tank, and then you can kind of adjust your playstyle based on that. And I think it's not really too much of a problem to play this style, because most people are just kind of going into the raid and they're more than fine doing their assignment, and they're not really planning to sweat, if that makes sense. So you might as well be, if you're the person that is planning to sweat and you're trying to, like, you know, provide the most healing you can to the raid, then the position to provide that from is definitely kind of the raid healer sort of flex position, where you can flex on to, you know, into any circumstance that you need. So for me, that tends to be not just raid healing, but also dispelling. You'll notice when I play and I have my you know, my walkthrough videos, we have the 3 meters up here, and usually the overall dispels, I'm pretty competitive on the overall dispels, unless people are dispelling stuff that really doesn't matter that much, right? But if we're talking about stuff that matters, I'm usually dispelling it pretty quickly. So yeah, I usually like to be on the flex in order to handle the dispels, and as well as handle, like, the clutch situations, because I know that I can do that, and I'm confident in that. So yeah, if you guys are you know, you're pugging, or maybe even are just doing a normal guild run, and you feel like you're kind of stuck in a position where you're not really being fully utilized, I would just talk to your you know, your guild about it, and see if they can swap you or something like that, because there's more than enough. There's a ton of people I've run into that are perfectly content to just spam the tank, right? They actually like that. They really like the simplistic play style of, like, we're just, like, you know, cancel casting on him nonstop, or we're just, in a case of a paladin, we're just literally spamming on him uninterrupted. So there's no shortage of people that want to do that, and I think if you're somebody that kind of wants to go the extra mile and you know, kind of triage the more emergency situations, the bops, the dispels, the shields, and stuff like that, then that's going to be more than welcome on most of your raid teams. And the better you are at doing that, the more I think you should be in that role, right? Because otherwise it's kind of just wasted. And obviously, this is not just telling healers, but if you're a raid leader watching this, keep that in mind when you're kind of doing your heal assignments. You know, if you have a player that you think is a really standout player in your raid, he's on time all the time, he consumes, he always has mana, he's heads up, he knows what's going on, definitely consider putting him on the raid, and he'll know what to do. You know, it's unlikely that if you put him on the raid, all of a sudden your tank's going to start dying. I mean, if that happens, obviously you can swap him back, or you can have a conversation about it, or maybe you can just have the conversation beforehand. But for the most part, I think he's going to know what to do, and he'll know when to heal the tanks and when to heal the raid. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on where your best player should go. And love to hear you guys' thoughts on it. Just let me know what you guys think, and I'll be coming out with more of these soon. So see you guys next time.